SLT Mobitel, the connection. SLT Mobitel, the connection.
ලෙන්ගතුකම වැඩි කරගන්න ලව්ජු රුපියල් 50ට අඩු කළා.
මාමේ එන්න අපිට එකක් බොමු.
Tonight, new challenges. Concerns grow after South African COVID-19 variant is discovered in the country.
It has the ability to escape certain vaccine-induced immunity.
Liberal interference. UK's Liberal Democrats call on PM Johnson to amend the UNHRC resolution and refer Sri Lanka to the ICC. Neighbourly preferences. Indian MP says his government would like to play a constructive role in Sri Lanka and make sure investments benefit the country.
So India would like to ensure that we make the investment in a way that Sri Lanka benefits first.
From bad to worse, ex-JVP MP files action on the government's 16 billion sugar tax loss and claims a further 500 million rupees in damages. All that and much more coming up on First at 9, this Friday the 12th of March 2021.
ඇල්කොහොල් අඩංගු hand sanitizer භාවිත කරන්න. ලෙඩ රෝග ඇති කරන විෂ බීජවලට එරෙහිව සටන් කරන්න. හඳුන්වා දීමේ මිල රුපියල් 350යි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhammika Ekanath. Now let's start off by taking a look at the pandemic situation. With Sri Lanka's daily caseload on the decline, with cases below 300 being reported in the past week, a brand new challenge has emerged from the much feared South African virus variant, with the first case confirmed in the island today. Director of the Allergy, Immunology and Cell Biology Unit of the University of Sri Jayewardenepura warns that the new variant could prove a challenge to vaccines-based immunity.
During the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic in Sri Lanka, there was hardly any talk of virus mutations. The wave was handled with great authority and the country looked to have averted serious adverse effects of it. All was well until October last year, when a more virulent strain entered the circulation, which resulted in more infections and much more fatalities. If that wasn't enough, on the 12th of last month, even more virulent strain, which has come to be known as the UK variant, was detected in the island. Now it transpires what the world has come to call the South African strand of the virus is also present in the island. Apart from its high virulence, the variant is capable of giving the vaccine-induced immunity the slip.
In the month of March, we have sequenced 93 viruses from all over the country, and we have found that 81 of them belongs to the Sri Lankan strain, and one of the viruses belong to B.1.428, which is a European strain. And from the 81 samples we received from all over the country, we have noticed one significant mutation named E484K mutation, which is, we call them as a escape mutation, which may have concerns about the changed variant infections in the future. And also we have found 5 variants of concerns among the sample, and out of them 4 belong to the B.1.1.7 UK variant and 1 belongs to the South African variant, which is B.1.351. And this is the first time we are reporting the South African variant in Sri Lanka, and it's been recognized in several countries, and it has the ability to escape certain vaccine-induced immunity. And apart from that, we have found another 5 European variants among the foreign returnees.
In the meantime, 304 COVID-19 infections were reported in the country yesterday. From the figure, 292 cases were confirmed across 23 districts, while the remaining 12 cases were detected among Sri Lankan expatriates. The Colombo district reported 75 cases, while 49 infections were reported from Galle. The district of Gampa reported 43 infections. As for today, 115 novel coronavirus cases have been confirmed so far. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka's overall number of COVID-19 related deaths rose to 520 yesterday after 5 fatalities were confirmed owing to the virus by the Director General of Health Services. 2 of the victims, however, had succumbed to the virus on the 8th and 9th of this month, while the remaining 3 had died yesterday. On the vaccination front, Sri Lanka had successfully immunized 759,548 persons against COVID-19 by the end of yesterday.
මීට පෙර අප ඉන්දියාවෙන් ලබාගත් ප්‍රධානයක් හැටියට සහ ඒ වගේම මුදල් දීලා ගත්ත එන්නත්ෝගේ අපි අවුරුදු 30ට වැඩි උදවියට ලබා දෙනවා. ඒ අතරේ මේ කොවැක්ස් වැඩපිළිවෙල යටතේ ලෝක සෞඛ්‍ය සංවිධානයෙන් ලැබුණු එන්නත්ෝගේ 60ට වැඩි උදවියට ලබා දෙන්න තමයි තීරණය කරලා තියෙන්නේ.
State Minister of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Professor Chanda Jayasumana, was asked whether Sri Lanka would halt administering the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, as done by Denmark and Norway, following reports of blood clots developing in recipients following immunization.
ඩෙන්මාර්කේ නෝර්වේ සහ අයිස්ලන්තයේ එහෙම තීරණයක් ගෙන තියෙන බව අපි දැනුවත් වුණා. ඒ වගේම සති දෙකක කාලයකට ඔවුන්ගේ නිරීක්ෂණ කටයුතු සඳහා තමයි එම නැවැත්වීම සිදු කළේ කියලා අපි නිරීක්ෂණය කරේ. ඉතින් මේ පිළිබඳ අපේ විශේෂඥ කමිටුව කරුණු සොයා බලමින් සිටිනවා. ශ්‍රී ලංකාව තුළ කිසිසේත් එවැනි තීරණයක් මේ මොහොත වෙනකොට අරගෙන නැහැ. එවැනි ප්‍රශ්නයක් ලංකාව තුළ උද්ගත වෙලත් නැහැ.
We have found that the immunogenicity is significantly very good among our people, and we encourage people to go ahead and get the vaccination whenever you get the chance, because the antibody production and the T cell immunity is quite good among our vaccine recipient, and it's comparable to the other parts of the world.
As things stand, Sri Lanka's overall number of COVID-19 recoveries stand at 83,958, with 397 persons being given the all clear to return to their daily lives today. That places the island's number of active cases at 2,621.
Sri Lanka's best health insurance with the fastest claim settlement. Soft Logic Life.
Pay just 500,000 rupees to reserve your unit today. Mulberry Residence.
Now, the leader of Britain's Liberal Democrats, Davey, has written to Prime Minister Boris Johnson seeking the PM's personal intervention in amending the draft resolution set to be brought against Sri Lanka at the United Nations Human Rights Council. In his letter, Davey says the draft resolution completely fails to rise to this challenge, adding that it is too vague and lacks robust commitment to international accountability mechanisms.
The UK's Liberal Democrats put pressure on the British government yesterday, criticising the draft of the resolution intended to be tabled against Sri Lanka at the United Nations Human Rights Council. In it, Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, says the draft resolution completely fails to rise to this challenge, and it also fails to incorporate the recommendations laid out in the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights report on Sri Lanka that was published earlier this year. While noting that many Tamil groups across the UK have been calling on the British government to take urgent action to ensure that UNHRC resolution is robust enough to ensure that those responsible are held accountable for crimes and human rights abuses committed against the Tamils, Davey called on PM Boris Johnson to personally ensure that the draft resolution is immediately rewritten. He says the written redraft must include a recommendation to refer the Sri Lankan situation to the international criminal courts to investigate and prosecute serious international crimes committed in Sri Lanka against the Tamils. It also calls for the establishment of a proper international independent investigative mechanism relating to Sri Lanka to collect evidence and prepare files for prosecution. The Lib Dems also want the UN Human Rights High Commissioner's recommendations from her January 2021 report incorporated, particularly her view that the principles of universal and extraterritorial jurisdiction must apply to the actions of the Sri Lankan government and military. And lastly, a strong stance on prevention is urged, including tangible measures to support and protect civil society groups and human rights defenders who are working on the ground in Sri Lanka. In the meantime, a letter has been written by 4 retired Madras High Court judges to United Nations Human Rights High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet, calling for Sri Lanka's referral to the international criminal courts through the United Nations Security Council. The 4 judges expressed deep concerns regarding the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Sri Lanka, citing the report of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The statement also calls the report a light at the end of the tunnel in their quest for justice to the victims of alleged war crimes committed by the Sri Lankan government.
India's Sherpa to the G7 and G20 meetings, parliamentarian Suresh Prabhu today affirmed the country's willingness to play a constructive role in ensuring investments made in Sri Lanka benefit the island first, while bringing in higher economic growth. Stressing on mutually beneficial trade relations, Prabhu added that India desires Sri Lanka to benefit from its march towards a $5 trillion economy when it becomes a reality. He made these remarks during a digital conference themed Enhancing India-Sri Lanka Economic Relations, organised by both the Federation of Indian Industry and the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce.
talking first about Sri Lanka, India big, little bigger country and has aspiration to be a $5 trillion economy. When we'll become $5 trillion economy, and that's a matter of time, we want Sri Lanka also to benefit from it. We should try to make the development possible, which will benefit our neighbors, particularly Sri Lanka. And to do that, the strategy has to put in place, which can then be implemented by private sector as well as by the government. The government could be facilitator, but private sector could be the leader. They can actually work in a way that will make sure that people will benefit by private sector investment. Sri Lanka could be a destination for investment by India in a very big way, particularly post-pandemic, and investments coming from outside will boost domestic economies in a very significant way. So India would like to ensure that we make the investment in a way that Sri Lanka benefits first, and to do that, we have to identify sectors. First rule for that would be that Sri Lanka must benefit, and second would be that Sri Lanka must remain clean and green for all times to come. Human development indices of Sri Lanka are not only based in South Asia, but probably one of the better ones as compared to other countries in the world. And therefore, to draw on that, how can India also partner with Sri Lanka for skill development, for creating more jobs, and leveraging this already existing huge human resource to the benefit of the society? We like to develop joint tourism projects so that people coming from Europe or any other part of the world visit South Asia and then visit Sri Lanka as well as India, so both the countries can benefit. Creating employment through investment is something which will be India's priority. We can set up a high-end economic zones into Sri Lanka, either in energy or in education or healthcare sector. The new focus of the world is healthcare. So if you can have an integrated healthcare sector, it will be traditional as well as modern medicine, not only pharmaceuticals, but also the equipment makers and digital infrastructure for delivering the healthcare system. If you can set it up, it will attract medical tourism also, besides investment into that sector. Any investment going into Sri Lanka must essentially bring in higher economic growth for the country. And to do that, India will like to play a very positive, constructive role with our friends in Sri Lanka.
Now, former JVP parliamentarian Sunil Handi today filed a fundamental rights petition in the Supreme Court against the loss of 15.9 billion rupees incurred by the government in reducing taxes on imported sugar. The President, the Prime Minister and the Attorney General have been named as respondents of the petition, amongst others. A report prepared by the Parliamentary Committee on Public Finances sparked a storm recently after revealing that the government loses out on 15.9 billion rupees in tax revenue owing to sugar import tax being slashed. Secretary to the Treasury S.R. Artigala, however, rejected the tax revenue loss claim, insisting that there is no revenue loss in a tax reduction scenario.
JVP Politburo member, former parliamentarian Sunil Handi filed a fundamental rights petition in the Supreme Court today, alleging that the government has incurred a loss of 15.9 billion rupees by reducing taxes on sugar imports. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Attorney General Dappula Dilivera, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, Secretary to the President Dr. P.B. Jayasundara, Secretary to the Ministry of Finance S.R. Artigala, former Chairman of Satusa Nushad Pereira, Pyramid Wilma Private Limited and its Chairman Sajad Mauzoon, as well as Chairman of Consumer Affairs Authority Shanta Dissanayake have been named as the respondents of the petition. The petitioner states that the government has incurred a loss of 15.9 billion rupees by reducing the tax levied on sugar imports to 25 cents. He went on to accuse that the import tax on sugar had been slashed with the intention of providing relief to several pro-government businessmen. The petitioner requests the Supreme Court to hold the respondents responsible for this particular act and to rule that they have violated basic human rights of the country's citizens. He also requests court to order the respondents to pay back the loss to the Treasury and to issue orders to the Attorney General to file cases against the respondents under criminal law. Furthermore, the petitioner appeals that an order be issued to the respondents to pay 500 million rupees to the petitioner as compensation for violating basic human rights. Meanwhile, convening a media briefing today, Secretary to the Ministry of Finance S.R. Artigala insisted that there is no such thing as a revenue loss in a tax deduction scenario.
We had given a report to the Public Finance Committee, and this has been the talk of the town for a while now. The sugar duty was reduced from 50 rupees per kg to 25 cents last year, and people were saying that there was a revenue loss, and they are quoting 15.9 billion rupees. The government will reduce the taxes and government can increase the taxes. Even when you say the VAT is reduced from 15 to 8, that's a tax reduction. So some revenue will be in a way reduced because of this action. But we are looking at the bigger picture. So in a tax reduction scenario, I don't think revenue loss could be talked about. But if you do a simple arithmetic, somebody can say there's a revenue loss, but that we don't interpret as a revenue loss. Then we can't do any tax reduction. අපි සීනි මිල බද්ද 725 කරනකොට සිල්ලර මිල තිබුණේ 135 ඩලර් වශයෙන් මම මේ. එතකොට එදා ටැක්ස් නැතුව CIF වැලියු එක කියන එක රුපියල් 72ක්. ටැක්ස් එක එකතු වුණාම 121ක් වුණා. ඔක්තෝබර් ඉඳන් දෙසැම්බර් වෙනකොට මේ 72 වැඩි වෙනවා 85ට. හැබැයි සීනි මිල 135 ඉඳන් 114ට අඩු වෙනවා. ඒ අඩු වෙන්නේ කොහොමද? බද්ද අඩු කරපු නිසා. CIF වැලියු එක රුපියල් 72 ඉඳන් අද වෙනකොට 90යි. මේක අඩු කළේ නැත්නම් මේ සීනි 135 175 විතර තියෙන්නේ. අද 115යි. ඒ බෙනිෆිට් එක ප්‍රමාණිකූලව මහ ජනතාවට ඇවිල්ලා තියෙනවා.
In many countries they don't take taxes like this at this kind of rate. Even in outpatient they don't do that this fast. And I can appreciate that.
Now don't compare America and Sri Lanka. America වල වැඩිපුර තිනිගුවාවත් මොකෝ කරන්නේ? They throw it away and then the prices will go up. Taxes වලින් නෙමෙයි manage කරන්නේ. අපි ඉතින් tax වලින් වැඩි. අපිට මුදල දාන්න බෑනේ. අපේ culture එකේ නෑ නේ මේක. You can't put some western thing come here and plant. It's difficult. We have to have a mix.
With the aim of boosting certain industries, the Secretary to the Treasury added that the newly amended tax concessions will be gazetted next week.
When the new government came, we have introduced certain tax concessions, broadly speaking, and also in the budget 2021, Honorable Prime Minister, Finance Minister suggested certain amendments, certain concessions to certain industries. Those have been incorporated in the Act, and we are hoping that we could gazette this next week. That will help the March 31st companies. The board has agreed that if the gazette is there, they can stick to the lower rates. So that could be a benefit to the companies. So that will happen. Apart from those two things, there were certain new amendments that we have proposed. That is listening to a lot of requests, grievances that came from different industries. One is the film industry. We have taken out the income taxes. Apart from that, we have already taken out certain taxes for imports related to film industry. So basically that is what's happening in the tax side. Apart from the Inland Revenue, the VAT Act amendments that was suggested in the budget and the December 19th, those have been incorporated now, will be an act very soon.
Now, the sale of carpets and footwear displaying the Sri Lankan national flag was made available for sale on Amazon, one of the world's leading online consumer goods retailers. The national flag was displayed on the products without being edited. A rug has been priced at $12, close to 2,400 rupees. Meanwhile, slippers made using the Sri Lankan flag are also on sale on several websites, including Amazon. With that being the case, Sri Lankan Foreign Ministry claimed that Foreign Secretary Admiral Professor Jayanath Kolamage has informed the Sri Lanka Embassy in Beijing to contact the manufacturer concerned in China, and also has brought to the attention of the Chinese Embassy in Colombo the advertising of Sri Lanka's national flag as a doormat. It said that the Sri Lanka Embassy in Washington, D.C. has also been instructed to follow up on the matter with the advertising platform Amazon. We will see you on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
කොරෝනා වෛරසය 99.9ක් දක්වා විනාශ කිරීමට උපකාරී වන Surf Excel Hygiene Boosters.
Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, a discussion was worked off today on the issues arising due to the shortage of tamed elephants to be used in religious practices such as processions. It was worked off under the patronage of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
Members of the Buddhist clergy and representatives of elephant owners held discussions with President Gotabaya Rajapaksa today. The issues arising owing to the dearth of tamed elephants to be used in processions was given attention during the talks. Members of the clergy pointed out that the matter requires both short and long-term solutions. The President instructed relevant officials to hold talks with elephant owners as well when preparing conditions for regulation and conservation of tamed elephants. In the meantime, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa today looked into the progress of rural housing projects. Under the housing program Obadagyak Ratata Hetak, 6,745 rural houses had been completed in the year 2020 with a state investment of 5.25 billion rupees.
Now, the remaining 22 volumes of the report compiled by the Presidential Commission of Inquiry, which investigated the 2019 Sunday terror attacks, were handed over to the Attorney General today. Last month, the Presidential Commission had handed over a total of 87 volumes containing its proceedings to the President's Secretary. However, only 65 volumes were received by the Attorney General and the remaining 22 were withheld, citing the sensitive nature of evidence pertaining to national security. On the 12th of February, the Attorney General had asked for a copy of the PCOI's final report from the Presidential Secretary in order to consider forwarding charges against the suspects. The first volume of the report was handed over to the Attorney General on the 25th of February. But he had requested the President's Secretary to submit all proceedings, documents and materials of the Commission to the Attorney General's Department. His coordinating officer, State Counsel Nishara Jayaratna, recently noted that all evidence recorded by the PCOI must be studied by the Attorney General before serving indictments against all those who were responsible for the bombings. Derana Startup 2021, an initiative that aims to identify the innovation and skills of aspiring entrepreneurs, is currently underway, organised by the Derana Media Network in partnership with USAID and a Jordanian non-profit organisation, Partners for Good. The second round of the selection process successfully concluded yesterday with an experienced panel of judges picking out budding entrepreneurs with great potential and skill.
Derana Startup 2021.
The Derana Media Network jointly organised the Derana Startup 2021 in partnership with USAID's Youth Skills Development and Entrepreneurship Program, ULEAD, and Jordanian non-profit organisation Partners for Good. Several institutions, including the Small Enterprise Development Division of the Ministry of Sports and Youth, are making their contributions to the initiative. An experienced panel of judges made selections from a considerable pool of aspiring entrepreneurs who applied for the competition from all over the island. The second round of the competition was worked off yesterday, with the budding entrepreneurs presenting their innovations and ideas.
I think today what I saw, these are Sri Lankans which can go into international. Some of them are really great. Some need a lot of guidance. Some need a mentor. For Sri Lanka, this is what we need, because if you look at all other countries, what they do is the government sector take them to international, give them exposure when they have good products. So I think this project should continue. We should identify at least 100 good products and take them into next level. I think must thank Derana for putting this up.
We can assist them financially, but they need lot of mentoring and other support as well, not only finance. Because if you are too successful in the market, you have to do a good product, marketable one, and the quality. So we need to continuously support them, and this is a very good initiation we did. So it is a journey where we need to look and work with them till the end of the thing.
Today we experienced so many inspiring stories from around the island, and we can truly see Sri Lankan talent and the innovation that we have within the country. I hope all these businesses are able to scale it up to a global level. I hope Derana Startup will fuel their growth.
We will see you shortly. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is First at 9. Now, at International Monetary Fund media briefing held yesterday, spokesman Jerry Rice confirmed the receipt of a Sri Lankan request for an emergency fund facility back in 2020, while offering a hint at the slim chance of the program being approved due to failure by the two parties to reach a consensus on key requirements. Rice also revealed that the IMF is continuing to monitor Sri Lanka's policy developments, including the recent approval of a $1.5 billion currency swap with the People's Bank of China.
The relationship between the International Monetary Fund and Sri Lanka has been one that can be best described as a love-hate relationship that depends on the policy of the government in power at the time. In Sri Lanka's 71-year membership with the IMF, the country's central bank has sought out the fund a total of 16 times, with the last approach just last year. Previously, Sri Lanka's extended fund facility agreement expired in June 2020 after the central bank showed signs of pursuing a less IMF-dependent policy. At the time, Central Bank Governor Professor W.D. Lakshman told media that Sri Lanka was not very keen on the conditionality of the IMF process and was only keen on future negotiations, but on its own terms. The sentiments were later echoed by State Minister for Money, Capital Markets and State Enterprise Reform Ajit Niwad Cabral, who told a business forum that the current conditions in Sri Lanka at the time would not necessarily require an IMF bailout. In the middle of last year, IMF mission chief for Sri Lanka, Masahiro Nozaki, announced that the country could not avail of the last disbursement under the EFF of around 200 million rupees due to incompletion of the final review of the arrangement, which expired in June 2020. However, when the COVID-19 pandemic struck in early 2020, the Sri Lankan government initiated talks with the IMF once again for a rapid finance instrument to help it tide over the initial economic shocks. But IMF spokesman Jerry Rice in Washington yesterday cast doubts over the possibility of such a program being approved, saying that despite having received the request, the two sides have been unable to reach a consensus on how to fulfill the facility's key requirements.
On Sri Lanka, just a reminder, the Extended Fund Programme with the IMF was approved in 2016. That expired last year, June 2020. We did receive a request from the Sri Lankan authorities for emergency financial support to help fight the COVID pandemic. The assessment of that support has taken longer than for other countries due to Sri Lanka's daunting economic challenges and high public debt. So we have sought but not reached understanding on how to fulfill the key requirements for what could be a rapid financing instrument, which would include policies to continue ensuring debt sustainability.
Rice added that the IMF is monitoring the situation in Sri Lanka, including its economic policy financial developments aimed at shoring up the country's balance of payments, especially the $1.5 billion currency swap with the People's Bank of China.
To address the balance of payment challenges, including from the COVID-19 impact on tourism, and to preserve international reserves, indeed Sri Lanka has relied on import restrictions since last year and recently introduced additional measures such as a requirement to convert 25% of export proceeds. We continue to closely monitor these economic policy financial developments in Sri Lanka, including a recent agreement on a swap line with the People's Bank of China.
Now, Chairman of Asia Securities Dumit Fernando is of the view that bilateral and multilateral financing are more practical near-term substitutes to an IMF lending program against the backdrop of COVID-19 recovery. He added that as fiscal space remains constrained to practically meet performance target of an IMF agreement, inflows through a customized approach would be more suited for Sri Lanka, in turn enabling a more deliberate growth agenda. His views came with regard to a report released by the research arm of the entity, which stated that it does not see a risk of sovereign default at this point.
The research arm of the independent investment banking firm Asia Securities says that it does not see a risk of sovereign default at this point. It says that the eagerly anticipated announcement of the $1.5 billion currency swap agreement with China this week is expected to provide a significant boost to local and foreign investor sentiment. Further, following the news, yields on the short end of the international sovereign bond curve plunged in response, indicating greater confidence of the international market in the Sri Lankan government's ability to honour its debt obligations. The end of February, the country's foreign reserves stood at $4.6 billion, and the report says that the $1.5 billion swap is a much-needed boost for the reserves position. The report further forecasts that in 2021, estimated capital account inflows, not including any potential investments into Port City, should exceed outflows in the capital account. The yield on the government sovereign bond maturing in July this year dropped by over 20 percentage points in secondary trading to 14.56% yesterday. The report adds that the announced finalization of the swap agreement opens up the possibility of further bilateral financing arrangements that could be successfully negotiated by the government in the second quarter of 2021 onwards. Reflecting on the report, Chairman of Asia Securities Dumit Fernando says that against the backdrop of COVID-19 recovery, bilateral and multilateral financing are more practical, near-term substitutes to an IMF lending program. Contrary to widely expressed opinions by the international firms, Fernando said that it is his view a conditional IMF program may not provide the counter-cyclical growth runaway that Sri Lanka needs right now. He further stated that as fiscal space remains constrained to practically meet performance targets of an IMF agreement, inflows through a customized approach would be more suited for Sri Lanka, in turn enabling a more deliberate growth agenda. Fernando goes on to say that an IMF program coupled with further structural reform would be viable at a future time once the entire world has moved beyond some of its near-term headwinds.
Now, taking a look at the Colombo bourse, Sri Lankan shares ended higher today, posting their best weekly gain in 7, driven by gains in industrial and financial stocks. The CSE All Share Price Index ended 0.5% higher at 7,247.48 posting a weekly gain of 2.7%, its best weekly gain since the week ending on the 22nd of January. Meanwhile, the S&P SL20 index of more liquid stocks gained 25.62 points to close at 2,893.44. Here's Dimantha Matthew with a brief report on today's market performance.
Today we saw a bit of a reversal in the market as the ASPI gained by around 34 points for the index to end at 7,247 points. So still we are seeing the index slightly below the 7,300 mark. It's still hovering in the range in between 7,200 to 7,500. So but confidence levels are slowly and gradually increasing in the market, and we are starting to see buying interest slowly emerge in the market. We saw buying interest mainly coming into some of the retail favorite counters, which had significantly declined in value compared to prices that we saw at the end of January. With that, overall index is starting to perform in a more lively manner.
Now, Sri Lanka is taking on the West Indies in the second ODI in the West Indies, and batting first, Sri Lanka is currently on 176 with a loss of 4 wickets after 36 overs. And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.